The sun dipped low behind the rugged peaks of the Montana Territory, casting long shadows across the rolling grasslands where Yates Landry stood, defiant as the mountains themselves. Blood trickled from a fresh cut above his eye, but his stance remained unwavering as he faced the three men before him, railroad men with polished boots that had never known honest work. $20,000, Landry. More money than you'll see in 3 lifetimes of breaking your back on this worthless patch of dirt, said the man in the center, Edwin Cartwright, regional director for the Western Pacific Railroad. His silk vest strained against his substantial girth as he gestured expansively across the land that had been in Yates's family for nearly 2 decades. Not interested, Yates replied, his voice carrying on the evening breeze. Never will be. Don't be a fool, boy, Cartwright's face reddened beneath his expensive hat. The railroad's coming through, if not with your blessing, then without it. Yates stepped forward, his 6'3" frame towering over the railroad man. At 32, years of ranching had hardened him into something unyielding. This land isn't for sale, not for 20,000, not for 50,000. Every man has a price, Cartwright sneered. Not me, Yates said quietly, his eyes drifting beyond the men to the small cabin and the sprawling ranch beyond the only home he'd known since his 16th birthday. This land is the only home I want. The railroad men departed with threats of legal action, but their words fell hollow against Yates's resolve. As darkness descended over the valley, he made his way back to the cabin, his boots crunching against the dry Montana earth of 1878. The territory was changing, railroads cutting through the wilderness like iron snakes, bringing with them towns and people and so-called progress. But Yates wanted none of it. The Broken Spur Ranch was everything to him, 5,000 acres of prime grazing land, nestled against the protective embrace of the mountains. His father had claimed this land, built it with calloused hands and stubborn determination, and with his dying breath had made Yates promise never to let it go. The cabin was dark and quiet when he entered, too quiet for a man who had spent most of his life in solitude. His ranch hands, Miguel and Thomas, were in town for supplies and wouldn't return until morning. Yates lit a lantern, illuminating the sparse but comfortable interior. A large oak table, handcrafted by his father, dominated the main room. A stone fireplace stood cold against the far wall. He touched the cut above his eye, wincing slightly. Cartwright's men had gotten physical when he refused their initial offer, but Yates had given better than he got. He poured water from a pitcher into a basin and washed away the blood, studying his reflection in the small mirror hanging on the wall. Dark brown hair falling across a weathered face, a strong jaw shadowed with several days' growth, and eyes the color of a summer storm gray with hints of blue. Sleep did not come easily that night, his mind filled with concerns about the railroad and their threats. Yates had heard stories from other ranchers' mysterious fires, cattle stampedes, cut fences. The railroad companies weren't known for taking no as an answer. Morning arrived with the distant thunder of hooves. Yates was instantly alert, grabbing his Winchester from beside the bed. He moved to the window, rifle ready, but relaxed when he recognized Miguel and Thomas returning from town. But there was a third rider with them, a slender figure on a chestnut mare. Yates stepped onto the porch, rifle still in hand, as the riders approached. "Mr. Landry," Miguel called out, waving his hat. "We've brought a visitor." The third rider came into clearer view, and Yates felt something inside him shift like tectonic plates beneath the earth. A woman with honey-colored hair pulled back in a practical braid sat atop the mare with the ease of someone born to the saddle. She wore a simple riding dress of deep blue, dusty from the trail but clearly of fine quality. "This is Miss Hannah Zimmerman," Thomas explained as they drew near. "Her stagecoach was robbed outside of Silver Creek. The driver was shot, and she was the only passenger. We found her walking alongside the road." Hannah Zimmerman met Yates's gaze with eyes the color of amber whiskey. "I apologize for the intrusion, Mr. Landry. Your men kindly offered shelter until arrangements can be made to continue my journey." "The road ain't safe for a woman alone," Miguel added, "especially with them Blackwell brothers causing trouble again." Yates nodded slowly, suddenly aware of his disheveled appearance. "Of course. You're welcome to stay as long as necessary, Miss Zimmerman." "Thank you," she replied, dismounting with a grace that belied her exhaustion. Close up, Yates could see the fatigue etched in her face, the dust of the trail on her clothes, but there was a resolute strength in her posture that commanded respect. "Where were you headed?" Yates asked, ushering her toward the cabin. "Silver Bend," she answered. "I've accepted a position as the schoolteacher there." Yates raised an eyebrow. Silver Bend was a rough mining town about 60 miles north, hardly a place for a genteel lady. "That's no place for," he began, then caught himself. "It's a difficult town." A small smile tugged at her lips. "I'm tougher than I look, Mr. Landry." Something in her tone made him believe her. "Well, you're safe here for now. Thomas, show Miss Zimmerman to the spare room." "Miguel, see to her horse." As the men carried out his instructions, Yates watched Hannah Zimmerman move toward the cabin, her back straight despite her obvious exhaustion. There was something compelling about her, something that made him both curious and wary. The next few days established a cautious rhythm at the broken spur. Hannah Zimmerman proved herself far from helpless, pitching in with cooking and even helping mend fences when Yates found himself short-handed after two of his seasonal workers quit unexpectedly, likely frightened off by railroad threats. "You handle that needle better than most men handle a gun," Yates remarked one evening as Hannah stitched a tear in one of his shirts. "My father was a tailor before he became a banker," she explained, her fingers moving deftly. "He believed every child should learn a practical trade, regardless of gender. And teaching, is that your practical trade?" Hannah's amber eyes met his. "It's my calling. Education changes lives, Mr. Landry, especially in places like Silver Bend." "Yates," he corrected her. "If you're going to be darning my socks, you might as well use my given name." A smile brightened her face. "Yates, then, and I'm Hannah." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching riders. Yates moved to the window, his body tensing as he recognized Cartwright's men, 5 of them this time, including a man he knew only as Jenkins, Cartwright's enforcer with a reputation for getting results through whatever means necessary. "Stay inside," Yates instructed Hannah, reaching for his rifle. "What's happening?" she asked, setting aside her sewing. "Railroad trouble." He stepped onto the porch, rifle held casually but ready. Miguel and Thomas emerged from the bunkhouse, similarly armed. Jenkins rode forward, his lean face set in a perpetual sneer beneath a black hat. "Landry." "Mr. Cartwright's getting impatient." "Then he should learn some patience," Yates replied evenly. "My answer hasn't changed." Jenkins's eyes narrowed. 25,000 now, final offer, not interested." "We've got papers from the territorial governor," Jenkins said, pulling a document from his coat. "Eminent domain. This land's been designated for railroad development." Yates felt a cold fury build inside him. "Those papers worth dying for, Jenkins." A tense silence followed, broken only by the soft nickering of horses. Behind Jenkins, his men shifted nervously, clearly not expecting armed resistance. "This isn't over, Landry," Jenkins finally said, tucking the papers away. "The railroad always gets what it wants." "Not this time," Yates replied. Jenkins spat on the ground before wheeling his horse around. "You'll regret this decision. Mark my words." As the railroad men rode away, Yates remained on the porch, rifle ready until they disappeared over the ridge. When he turned back to the cabin, Hannah stood in the doorway, her expression troubled. "They want your land for the railroad?" she asked. Yates nodded, stepping past her into the cabin. "They've been trying for months." "Why refuse? $25,000 is a fortune." He placed his rifle on the rack and turned to face her. This land was my father's dream, his legacy. I promised him I'd keep it in the family. Hannah studied him with those perceptive amber eyes. There's more to it than that. Yates hesitated, then gestured for her to follow him. They walked in silence to a small rise behind the cabin. The setting sun painted the valley in hues of gold and amber, casting long shadows across the grassland where cattle grazed peacefully. The distant mountains stood sentinel, their peaks catching the last light of day. "My father died in that meadow," Yates said quietly. "Heart gave out while he was mending fences. I found him at sunset, looking just like this." He swept his arm across the panorama. This wasn't just land to him, it was freedom, it was beauty, it was everything he'd fought for. Hannah's voice was soft beside him. "And to you, it's home," he said simply, "the only one I've ever wanted." Their eyes met, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits, who understood the value of things that couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. The following morning brought rain, a gentle spring shower that transformed the land into a tapestry of glistening greens and browns. Yates worked in the barn, repairing tack and checking supplies, while Hannah had insisted on cleaning the cabin's windows to earn her keep, as she put it. Through the newly cleaned glass, Yates could see her moving about the cabin, humming softly to herself. She'd been at the Broken Spur for nearly a week now, and her presence had changed something fundamental about the place. The cabin felt less empty, more alive somehow. Miguel entered the barn, shaking water from his hat. "Mail from town," he said, handing Yates several envelopes. "And news. The stagecoach line suspended service to Silver Bend after what happened to Miss Hannah's coach. Won't be running again for at least 3 weeks." Yates nodded, sorting through the mail. One envelope bore the seal of the territorial court in Helena. He tore it open, his expression darkening as he read. "Bad news, boss," Miguel asked. "Court summons," Yates replied grimly. "The railroad's filing formal proceedings to claim the land." Miguel cursed softly in Spanish. "They can do that. They're certainly trying." Yates folded the letter and tucked it into his pocket. "I need to ride to Helena, speak with a lawyer." "When will you go?" "Tomorrow at first light. It's a 3-day ride each way." Miguel nodded. "Thomas and I will keep things running here." Yates's eyes drifted to the cabin where Hannah was now preparing the midday meal. "And Miss Zimmerman, she'll be safe with us," Miguel assured him. "Though I suspect she's safer than most of us realize. I saw her checking your shotgun yesterday, handled it like she knew what she was doing." This information didn't surprise Yates as much as it might have a week ago. Hannah Zimmerman had already proven herself to be full of unexpected capabilities. That evening, Yates explained the situation to Hannah over a dinner of venison stew she had prepared. "I'll need to be gone for at least a week," he concluded. "Miguel and Thomas will see to your needs, and whenever the stagecoach resumes service, they'll escort you to Silver Bend." Hannah considered his words while absently stirring her stew. These railroad men, they seemed determined. They are. The railroad means progress to men like Cartwright, and progress means profit. "And what will you do if the court rules against you?" Yates set down his fork. "Fight it. Every step of the way, even if it means risking everything." "Some things are worth the risk," he said, his eyes holding hers. Hannah smiled slightly. "Like your father's legacy." "Like home," he corrected gently. Later that night, as Yates packed for his journey, a soft knock came at his door. Hannah stood in the hallway, a book in her hands. "I found this on your shelf," she said, holding up a well-worn copy of Wordsworth's poems. "I wouldn't have taken you for a poetry reader." Yates felt a flush of embarrassment. "My mother's. She taught me to read from that book. She had excellent taste." Hannah opened the volume to a marked page. "For I have learned to look on nature not as in the hour of thoughtless youth, but hearing oftentimes the still, sad music of humanity." "You know Wordsworth," he said, surprised. "I'm a teacher, remember?" Her smile was warm in the lamplight. "I came to return the book, but also to give you this." She handed him a small leather pouch. "Herbs for tea, they'll help with sleep on the trail." Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and Yates felt a current of awareness pass between them. "Thank you," he said, his voice rougher than intended. Hannah took a step back, suddenly seeming unsure. "Safe travels, Yates. I hope you find the answers you need in Helena." Before he could respond, she turned and disappeared down the hallway, leaving behind the faint scent of lavender and the lingering warmth of her presence. The journey to Helena was long and arduous, made more difficult by unexpected spring storms that turned trails to mud and rivers to raging torrents. Yates pushed through, driven by determination and the growing fear that the railroad's influence might extend further than he had anticipated. Helena in 1878 was a city in transition, evolving from a gold rush boomtown into something more permanent and civilized. Still, it retained the rawness of the frontier, with muddy streets and a mixture of crude log structures alongside more ambitious brick buildings. The lawyer Yates sought was recommended by a rancher friend, Andrew Sullivan, one of the few attorneys known to stand against the railroad companies. His office was above a haberdashery on Last Chance Gulch, the main thoroughfare that had once been a gold-producing creek bed. Sullivan was older than Yates expected, with silver hair and spectacles perched on a prominent nose. He listened carefully as Yates explained his situation, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. "The railroad's claiming eminent domain through the Territorial Development Act," Sullivan said when Yates finished. "It's a new law pushed through by railroad interests. They're arguing that your land is essential for the economic development of the territory." "It's my land," Yates insisted. "Purchased legally, with papers signed by the territorial governor himself back in '59. Sullivan removed his spectacles, polishing them thoughtfully. "Mr. Landry, I won't mislead you. The railroads have tremendous influence both politically and economically. They've won similar cases throughout the Western territories, but there must be something we can do. Perhaps." Sullivan replaced his spectacles. "The law requires that the land seized must be necessary for the public good, not merely convenient. If we can prove that an alternate route would serve equally well, we might have a case. There's plenty of land to the north that would work just as well," Yates said eagerly. "Empty land with no established ranches. Then that's our argument. But it will take time to prepare, and the hearing is scheduled for next month." Sullivan fixed Yates with a stern gaze. "In the meantime, be careful. Railroad companies have been known to take extralegal measures when faced with resistance." The warning echoed in Yates's mind as he departed Helena the following day. Sullivan had agreed to represent him, but the lawyer's cautious optimism hadn't dispelled Yates's concerns. Something about the railroad's persistence suggested they wanted the broken spur specifically, not just any land for their tracks. The return journey felt even longer, his thoughts continually drifting between the impending legal battle and, unexpectedly, to Hannah Zimmerman. He found himself wondering about her past, her dreams beyond teaching in Silver Bend, and whether she was still at the ranch or had already continued her journey. On the afternoon of the third day, as Yates crested the final ridge overlooking the broken spur, he pulled his horse to an abrupt halt. A plume of dark smoke rose from the direction of the northern pasture. Spurring his horse forward, he galloped down the slope, fear clutching at his chest. As he drew nearer, he could see flames consuming the dry grass of the pasture, spreading rapidly toward the tree line. Miguel Thomas and, to his surprise, Hannah were fighting the blaze with wet blankets and shovels, desperately trying to create a fire break. Yates dismounted and ran to join them, grabbing a shovel from a pile of tools they had brought. "What happened?" he shouted over the roar of the flames. "Started about an hour ago," Thomas called back, his face streaked with soot. "No lightning, no campfire, just suddenly caught." Yates knew immediately Jenkins and the railroad men, but there was no time to dwell on that now. The fire was spreading too quickly, endangering not only the pasture, but potentially the entire ranch if it reached the wooded area to the east. For hours they fought the blaze, their muscles screaming with exhaustion, lungs burning from smoke. Hannah worked alongside the men without complaint, her face determined beneath the layer of ash and sweat. As darkness fell, they finally gained the upper hand, containing the fire to a blackened swat of approximately 50 acres. It was well past midnight when they finally returned to the cabin, exhausted beyond words. Hannah silently tended to minor burns and cuts they had all sustained, her gentle hands belying her own fatigue. "They did this," Yates said at last, breaking the heavy silence as Hannah wrapped a bandage around a burn on his forearm. "The railroad men. We found this," Miguel confirmed, placing a charred kerosene can on the table, hidden in the grass at what looks like the starting point. Yates's jaw tightened. "They think they can scare me off." Hannah finished securing the bandage, her fingers lingering on his arm. "What did the lawyer say in Helena?" Briefly, Yates explained Sullivan's cautious assessment and their planned legal strategy. "But the railroad clearly isn't planning to wait for the courts to decide." "What will you do?" Hannah asked, her amber eyes searching his face. "Increase patrols. We'll need to watch the boundaries day and night." He looked to Miguel and Thomas. "We might need to hire more men." "Already ahead of you, boss," Thomas said. "Sent word to Carson and Weathers. They'll be here tomorrow." Yates nodded his thanks, then turned back to Hannah. "The stagecoach, any word on when service will resume?" A shadow passed over her face. "Another week, at least." "You're welcome to stay," Yates said quickly, then added, "for safety." A small smile touched her lips. "Thank you, I'd like that." Over the next several days, the ranch operated on high alert. Carson and Weathers, experienced cowhands who had worked for Yates in previous seasons, arrived to help patrol the boundaries. Cattle were moved to the southern pastures, farther from potential interference. Despite the tension, Yates found himself increasingly drawn to Hannah's company. In the evenings, after the day's work was done, they would often sit on the porch, watching the sunset and talking. He learned that she was 26, the daughter of a Chicago banker who had died 2 years earlier, leaving her with enough inheritance to pursue her dream of teaching in the West. "My father wanted me to marry a business associate of his," she explained one evening. "A man 30 years my senior with 3 children already grown. When I refused, we quarreled bitterly." Her eyes grew distant with memory. "We reconciled before his death, thankfully, but he never fully understood my desire for independence." "And now you seek that independence in Silver Bend, of all places," Yates remarked. Hannah laughed, the sound warm in the gathering twilight. "Where better? The frontier is remaking itself daily. There are fewer expectations, fewer constraints, more dangers too." "Life without risk is hardly living at all," she countered, her eyes meeting his with a challenge that made his heart quicken. On the 10th day after Yates's return from Helena, Jenkins and his men appeared again, this time accompanied by Edwin Cartwright himself. 6 riders in all, they approached the ranch house with the confidence of men who believed the law, or at least power, was on their side. Yates met them in the yard, flanked by his 4 ranch hands. He noted with concern that all the railroad men wore sidearms, and Jenkins carried a rifle across his saddle. "Landry," Cartwright called out, reining his horse to a stop. "I see our message didn't persuade you." "If by message you mean arson, then no, it didn't," Yates replied coldly. "Neither will any other underhanded tactics you might be planning." Cartwright's jowly face reddened. "Now see here," "No, you see here," Yates interrupted. "This is private property. You're trespassing. State your business or leave." "Our business," Cartwright said, his voice hardening, "is the future of this territory. The railroad is coming through, Landry. The court will rule in our favor next month, and you'll be forced off this land with whatever pittance they decide is fair compensation." "Then why not wait for the court's decision?" Yates challenged. "Why the fire? Why the threats?" Cartwright shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "We had nothing to do with any fire. This says otherwise." Yates held up the charred kerosene can, found right where the fire started. "Same brand the railroad uses for its lamps." Jenkins's hand moved slightly toward his gun, but Yates's men immediately raised their rifles in response, creating a momentary standoff. "Careful, Jenkins," Yates warned. "My men are all excellent shots, and they're mighty protective of this land." The tension crackled like the air before a lightning strike. Then, unexpectedly, the cabin door opened, and Hannah stepped out onto the porch. She had changed from her usual practical dress into a formal visiting gown of deep green that accentuated her figure and the honey gold of her hair, which was arranged in an elegant coiffure. "Mr. Cartwright," she called out, her voice clear and authoritative. "What a surprise to see you so far from civilization." Cartwright looked startled, clearly not expecting to find a genteel lady at the remote ranch. "Madam," he acknowledged with a hasty tip of his hat, "I don't believe I've had the pleasure." "Hannah Zimmerman," she replied, descending the porch steps with graceful confidence. "Of the Chicago Zimmermans. My late father was Frederick Zimmerman of First Mercantile Bank." Cartwright's expression changed instantly at the mention of the prominent banking name. "Miss Zimmerman. I had no idea. What brings you to this establishment?" "I'm a guest of Mr. Landry's while awaiting transportation to my teaching position," she explained, moving to stand beside Yates. "And I find his hospitality far more civilized than the behavior I'm witnessing from supposed representatives of progress." Her pointed remark caused Cartwright to flush with embarrassment. "We meant no disrespect, Miss Zimmerman. This is merely a business matter between the railroad and Mr. Landry." "A business matter that apparently includes arson and intimidation," she noted coolly. "How fascinating. I wonder if my father's associates on the Eastern investment boards would find such tactics equally fascinating." The implicit threat hung in the air. Cartwright's ruddy face paled slightly as he clearly calculated the potential damage to railroad investments if word of their methods reached Eastern financial circles. "There must be some misunderstanding," he said hastily. "The Western Pacific Railroad operates with the highest ethical standards." "I'm certain it does," Hannah replied with sweet insincerity. "Which is why I'm equally certain you'll allow the court to decide this matter without further incidents." Cartwright cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Of course, Miss Zimmerman, we're merely here to remind Mr. Landry of the hearing date." He turned to Yates with considerably less bluster than before. "June 15th. Helena Courthouse, 10 o'clock. I'll be there," Yates assured him. With a final tip of his hat to Hannah, Cartwright signaled his men to withdraw. Jenkins cast a venomous glare at Yates before reluctantly following his employer. As the railroad men rode away, Yates turned to Hannah with newfound respect and curiosity. "The Chicago Zimmermans." A mischievous smile played at her lips. "My father was indeed Frederick Zimmerman, and he did own a bank in Chicago, a small one serving primarily German immigrants, but Cartwright doesn't need to know that." Yates couldn't help but laugh. "You're full of surprises, Miss Zimmerman." "A woman traveling alone in the West needs to be resourceful," she replied, her amber eyes dancing with humor. Then, more seriously, "Will they stay away now? For a while, perhaps, but Cartwright won't give up easily. There's something about this land specifically that they want." Hannah frowned thoughtfully. "What makes your land different from the surrounding areas?" Yates shook his head. "Nothing obvious, good water, good grazing, but nothing unique enough to explain their fixation." "There must be something," Hannah insisted. "Something valuable enough to justify their aggressive tactics." That evening, after the ranch hands had retired to the bunkhouse, Yates spread out his father's old maps of the property on the oak table. Hannah leaned over his shoulder, the scent of lavender surrounding him as they examined the detailed drawings. "My father was meticulous," Yates explained. "Mapped every creek, every ridge, even noted soil types in different areas." Hannah studied the maps with a teacher's careful attention. "What's this area here?" she asked, pointing to a section marked with a series of small X's in the northeastern corner of the property. "Old mine shafts," Yates replied. "Played out silver mine from the early days, My father bought the land after the mining company abandoned it. Hannah's finger traced the path of a creek that ran near the mine shafts. And this creek, does it still follow this course, more or less? Spring floods sometimes change it slightly. She straightened, tapping her finger thoughtfully against her lips. Would you show me this area tomorrow? Yates raised an eyebrow. It's rough country, not much to see but some abandoned shafts and equipment. Humor me, she said with a smile that made it impossible to refuse. The next morning dawned clear and cool, perfect for riding. Yates saddled his bay gelding and Hannah's chestnut mare, packing a small lunch for their excursion. Hannah appeared dressed in riding clothes, practical canvas trousers, beneath a split skirt that allowed her to ride astride rather than side saddle. A concession to frontier practicality that nonetheless highlighted her figure in ways that made Yates consciously avert his eyes. They rode northward through green pastures dotted with wildflowers, the land gradually becoming more rugged as they approached the foothills. Hannah proved to be an excellent horsewoman, handling the increasingly difficult terrain with ease. You ride well for a city girl, Yates remarked as they navigated a rocky slope. My mother's family owned a horse farm outside Chicago, she explained. I spent summers there as a child. It was my favorite place in the world, wild and free compared to the constraints of city life. The conversation flowed easily between them as they rode, discussing books they had read, places they had seen, dreams they still harbored. Yates found himself revealing thoughts he had never shared with anyone, his occasional loneliness, his doubts about dedicating his life to the ranch, his secret fear that he might never live up to his father's legacy. It's not about living up to someone else's legacy, Hannah said thoughtfully when he confessed this fear. It's about creating your own. Your father built something from nothing. You're preserving it, improving it, making it yours in a different way. Her words eased something inside him, a tension he hadn't fully recognized until it began to dissolve. By midday, they reached the northeastern section where the abandoned mine was located. The area was markedly different from the rest of the ranch: rocky outcroppings, sparse vegetation, and the weathered remains of mining equipment scattered about like the bones of strange mechanical beasts. They dismounted near the largest shaft entrance, securing the horses to a stunted pine. Yates retrieved a lantern from his saddlebag and lit it. Stay close, he warned as they approached the shaft. These old mines can be dangerous. Cave-ins, bad air, forgotten explosives. The mine entrance was partially collapsed, but there was enough space to enter cautiously. The air inside was cool and damp, heavy with the scent of earth and minerals. Their footsteps echoed as they moved deeper into the mountain, the lantern light casting long, dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls. What are we looking for exactly? Yates asked, his voice sounding strangely hollow in the confined space. Hannah ran her hand along the wall, examining the rock with surprising intensity. I'm not entirely sure. Something valuable enough to make the railroad desperate for this specific piece of land. They proceeded deeper, passing the rusted remains of mining carts and tools abandoned when the silver veins played out. After about 50 yards, the main tunnel branched into two smaller passages. Which way did they mine primarily? Hannah asked. To the right, according to my father's maps. That's where the silver was. Then let's go left, she suggested, away from where they focused their efforts. Yates hesitated, then nodded, intrigued by her reasoning. The left passage was narrower, requiring them to duck in places. After about 30 yards, it opened into a small chamber where the miners had clearly begun work but abandoned it quickly. Hannah moved slowly around the chamber, examining the walls carefully in the lantern light. Suddenly, she stopped, her body becoming very still. Yates, she called softly. Bring the light here. He moved to her side, holding the lantern higher to illuminate the section of wall she was studying. At first, he saw nothing unusual, just the same gray-brown rock as elsewhere. Then, as she scraped away a layer of dirt with her fingernail, he caught a glimpse of something different, a vein of black rock shot through with distinctive amber-colored streaks. "Coal," he said, recognition dawning. "There's coal here." Hannah nodded, her eyes bright with excitement. "Not just any coal. Look at how it breaks, the color of the streaks. I believe this is anthracite, the highest grade of coal, much more valuable than bituminous coal." Yates stared at her in surprise. "How do you know about coal grades?" A small, sad smile touched her lips. "My fiancé was a geologist. He died in a mining accident 3 years ago while surveying potential coal fields in Pennsylvania. I learned a great deal from him during our engagement. The revelation of a fiancé, even a deceased one, stirred an unexpected pang of jealousy in Yates's chest. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "Thank you." Hannah turned back to the coal vein, her scientific interest overcoming the momentary sadness. "This explains everything. The railroad doesn't want your land for tracks, they want what's beneath it. Anthracite coal is essential for industrial development. Steel mills, factories. The railroads themselves run on it." Yates's mind raced with the implications. The silver miners must have discovered it but didn't recognize its value, or maybe they did but kept it quiet while they focused on the more immediately profitable silver. "Either way," Hannah said, "this is why Cartwright is so determined. A major anthracite deposit in Montana territory would be incredibly valuable, worth far more than what they've offered you for the land." They emerged from the mine into the afternoon sunlight, both quiet with the weight of their discovery. As they mounted their horses for the return journey, Yates's thoughts churned with possibilities and decisions. "This changes everything," he said finally, as they rode side by side down the slope. "If there's coal beneath my land, I could mine it myself, or lease the rights to a company other than the railroad." Hannah nodded. "You could dictate the terms rather than being forced to sell." "I need to get samples, have them properly tested," Yates continued, his mind already planning the next steps. "And keep this quiet until after the court hearing." They rode in thoughtful silence for a while, the rhythm of the horses' hooves a soothing counterpoint to the tumult of Yates's thoughts. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the land as they approached a ridge overlooking the heart of the broken spur. Yates reined his horse to a stop at the crest, gazing out over his ranch, the sprawling pastures, the creek winding like a silver ribbon through the valley, the cabin and outbuildings nestled against the protective embrace of a stand of pines. Hannah stopped beside him, following his gaze. "It truly is beautiful," she said softly. "I understand now why you fought so hard to keep it." "It's not just land," Yates replied, his voice low and intense. "It's everything." Hannah turned to him, the setting sun gilding her honey-colored hair and warming her amber eyes. "What will you do now that you know about the coal?" Yates met her gaze, suddenly aware of how much her opinion had come to matter to him in the short time they'd known each other. "I don't know yet. The coal could bring wealth, security, but it would also change everything. The mining would scar the land, bring industry and workers and development. Progress isn't always a bad thing," Hannah suggested gently. "No," he agreed, "but it comes at a cost." Their eyes held for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then, without conscious thought, Yates leaned across the space between their horses and kissed her. Her lips were soft and warm against his, hesitant at first, then responding with a sweetness that made his heart race. When they finally broke apart, Hannah's cheeks were flushed, her eyes wide with surprise and something deeper, more compelling. "I shouldn't have done that," Yates said, though he felt no real regret. "No," Hannah agreed, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth, "but I'm glad you did." The ride back to the ranch was charged with a new awareness between them. Conversation flowing easily yet weighted with meaningful glances and subtle touches as they helped each other across difficult terrain. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun had set and stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Miguel met them at the barn, his expression troubled. "Boss, there's news from town." The stagecoach is running again. First one leaves for Silver Bend day after tomorrow." Hannah's face fell, and Yates felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. He had known her time at the Broken Spur was temporary, yet somehow the reality of her departure had seemed distant, theoretical. "I see," Hannah said, her voice carefully composed. "That's good news. I've already delayed my arrival in Silver Bend far too long." That night, dinner was a subdued affair, the conversation stilted despite their best efforts. After the meal, Yates retreated to the porch, unable to bear the thought of Hannah packing her belongings for departure. He sat in the darkness, watching the stars emerge in the vast Montana sky, when he heard the cabin door open behind him. Hannah joined him on the porch swing, close enough that their shoulders touched. For a long while they simply sat in silence, the gentle creaking of the swing the only sound besides the distant chorus of night insects. "I don't want to leave," Hannah said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've never felt so, at home, as I have here." Yates's heart leaped at her words, but caution tempered his response. "You have obligations in Silver Bend, children waiting for their teacher." "Yes," she sighed, leaning slightly against him. "Obligations." Another silence fell between them, comfortable yet charged with unspoken feelings. Yates gathered his courage, turning to face her in the moonlight that silvered her features. "Hannah," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "I know we've known each other only a short time," but the sound of approaching riders interrupted him, multiple horses moving fast in the darkness. Yates was on his feet instantly, reaching for the rifle he kept by the door. "Get inside," he told Hannah, his tone brooking no argument. "Lock the door." The riders came into view, 4 men, moving with purpose toward the cabin. In the moonlight, Yates recognized Jenkins and his railroad thugs, but there was something different about their approach, no pretense of civility this time, just grim determination. "Landry," Jenkins called out, his voice hard as he reined his horse to a stop in the yard. "We know about the coal." "Cartwright's offering 50,000 now, final chance." Yates raised his rifle, aiming carefully. "Get off my land, Jenkins." The response was a gunshot that splintered the porch railing inches from Yates's position. He fired back, diving for cover as more shots erupted from the railroad men. Inside the cabin, he could hear Hannah screaming his name. Miguel and the other ranch hands emerged from the bunkhouse, weapons ready, creating a crossfire that forced Jenkins and his men to retreat to the edge of the yard. The night exploded with gunfire, muzzle flashes briefly illuminating the scene like lightning through the chaos. Yates saw Jenkins dismount and move toward the barn, something clutched in his hand. With horror, Yates realized it was a kerosene lamp. "The barn," he shouted to his men. "He's going to torch the barn." Yates broke from cover, running toward Jenkins with reckless determination. A bullet grazed his arm, but he barely felt it, focused entirely on stopping the arsonist before he could set the fire. He tackled Jenkins just as the man was about to throw the lamp, sending them both crashing to the ground, the lamp smashing harmlessly several feet away. They struggled in the dirt, Jenkins reaching for his revolver, Yates fighting to pin the man's arms. Jenkins was strong, desperation lending him power, but Yates matched him with the fury of a man defending everything he held dear. A shot rang out, startlingly close, and Jenkins suddenly went limp beneath him. Yates looked up to see Hannah standing a few yards away, his shotgun in her hands, her face pale but determined in the moonlight. "The others are retreating," she said, her voice remarkably steady. Miguel winged one of them. The silence that followed the gunfight seemed deafening. Yates climbed to his feet, checking Jenkins quickly to confirm he was dead. The shotgun blast had caught him in the chest, leaving no chance of survival. "Are you hurt?" Hannah asked, lowering the shotgun as she approached. "Just a graze," Yates replied, suddenly aware of the burning pain in his arm. "You saved my life, as you've saved mine," she said simply. Then, as the adrenaline began to fade, she started to tremble, the shotgun slipping from her grasp. I didn't mean to." Yates pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as the delayed shock set in. "It's all right," he murmured into her hair. "You did what you had to do. He would have killed me, then burned us all out." The aftermath of the gunfight brought the local sheriff, a grim-faced man named Hollister who had little love for the railroad companies. After taking statements from everyone present and examining Jenkins's body and the evidence of the railroad men's attack, he declared the shooting a clear case of self-defense. "Been a long time coming with Jenkins," Sheriff Hollister said as he prepared to transport the body back to town. "Man's been Cartwright's dirty work specialist for years. Nobody'll shed tears over him." He fixed Yates with a serious look. "But Cartwright's got influence. There'll be trouble over this." "I can handle trouble," Yates replied, "and I'll see you at the hearing in Helena next month." After the sheriff departed, Yates found Hannah sitting alone on the porch, wrapped in a blanket despite the mild night. Her face was composed, but her eyes held shadows of the night's violence. "Sheriff says you're in the clear," he told her, sitting beside her on the swing. "Self-defense, plain and simple," she nodded, her gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "I should feel more, something, remorse perhaps, but all I feel is relief that you're safe." Yates took her hand, his thumb gently stroking her knuckles. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known, Hannah Zimmerman." A small smile touched her lips. "Not always, but for you, for this place." She turned to face him, her eyes luminous in the starlight. "Yates, before we were interrupted, you were about to say something." His heart hammered in his chest as he gathered his courage once more. "I was going to ask you not to go to Silver Bend, to stay here with me." "As what?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your housekeeper, your guest." "As my wife," he said, the words falling from his lips with the weight of absolute certainty. "I know it's fast, maybe too fast, but when you know something's right. Hannah, I've lived on this land most of my life, but it never truly felt like home until you were here." Tears welled in her amber eyes, catching the starlight. "What about my teaching position? The children expecting me?" "Silver Bend can find another teacher," Yates said, "but I'll never find another you." He hesitated, then added, "We could build a school here on the ranch. There are children scattered across the valley with no proper education. You could teach them, make a difference right here." Hope bloomed in her expression. "You do that, build a school. I'd do anything to make you happy," he replied simply. "To make you want to stay." Hannah's answer was to lean forward and kiss him. A kiss that contained all the promise of tomorrow and all the certainty of having finally found home in each other's arms. The court hearing in Helena a month later was anticlimactic after the drama that had preceded it. With Andrew Sullivan presenting evidence of the railroad's underhanded tactics, including sworn testimony about Jenkins's attack, and attempted arson along with proof that alternative routes existed that would serve the railroad's stated purposes equally well. The territorial judge ruled firmly in Yates's favor. The discovery of anthracite coal on the property remained their secret for the time being, a card held in reserve should future battles with the railroad become necessary. For now, it was enough that the broken spur remained intact, its boundaries secure. Hannah and Yates were married in a simple ceremony beneath the sprawling oak tree behind the cabin, with Miguel Thomas and a handful of neighboring ranchers as witnesses. She wore a dress of ivory silk ordered from Helena, with wildflowers in her honey-colored hair, and Yates thought she had never looked more beautiful than when she promised to build a life with him on the land they both now called home. True to his word, Yates began construction on a small schoolhouse near the main road that autumn, using lumber from the ranch's own pine forests. By spring, it was ready for its first students, 8 children from neighboring ranches and farms who previously had little access to formal education. Watching Hannah in her element, teaching with passion and patience, Yates felt a contentment he had never known before. The ranch prospered under their joint stewardship, with Hannah's practical intelligence complementing Yates's ranching experience in ways that improved every aspect of the operation. On their first anniversary, as they sat on the porch swing watching the sunset paint the valley in hues of gold and amber, Hannah rested her head on Yates's shoulder with a contented sigh. "Are you happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "Completely," she replied without hesitation. "Though I may be even happier soon." Yates raised an eyebrow. "Oh," Hannah took his hand and placed it gently on her still flat stomach. "We'll need to build an addition to the cabin, for the nursery." Joy unlike anything he had ever known flooded through Yates as the meaning of her words registered. He pulled her into his arms, his heart too full for speech, his future suddenly expanding with possibilities he had never dared to imagine before she came into his life. Later that night, as Hannah slept peacefully beside him, Yates gazed out the bedroom window at the star-filled Montana sky. The railroad had come through the territory as predicted, but on a route that bypassed the broken spur by several miles. The coal beneath their land remained undisturbed for now, a resource they might someday develop on their own terms, or perhaps leave as a legacy for future generations. For tonight, it was enough that the land remained as his father had loved it, as Yates had protected it, and as Hannah had helped him see it anew, not just acres of grass and trees and rocky slopes, but home in the deepest sense of the word. A place of belonging, of family, of love that had found him when he least expected it. 5 years later, the broken spur had grown into one of the most prosperous ranches in the territory. The schoolhouse had expanded to accommodate 20 students, with Hannah still teaching daily, her passion for education undiminished. Their son, James Frederick Landry, now 4 years old, was joined by a 2-year-old sister, Elizabeth. Both children thriving in the freedom of ranch life under the watchful eyes of parents who adored them. The railroad had made one final attempt to acquire the land 3 years earlier, offering a sum that would have made Yates and Hannah wealthy beyond imagination. They had declined without hesitation, their decision unanimous and unwavering. Why sell what's already priceless? Hannah had said when the railroad representative expressed disbelief at their refusal. "This land isn't just soil and rocks, it's our children's heritage, our family's foundation." On a warm summer evening, as they watched their children chasing fireflies in the gathering twilight, Yates pulled Hannah close, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender that still clung to her honey-colored hair, now occasionally threaded with silver. "I never thanked you," he said softly. "For what?" she asked, turning in his embrace to meet his gaze. "For showing me that home isn't just a place," he replied. "It's the people you love. When I told Cartwright that this land was the only home I wanted, I didn't understand what home truly meant, but I do now because of you." Hannah's amber eyes, still as bright and perceptive as the day they met, filled with tenderness as she reached up to touch his face. "And I never thanked you for giving me a home when I was searching for one without even knowing it." Their lips met in a kiss that still held all the wonder of discovery, and all the comfort of belonging there beneath the vast Montana sky, on the land that had brought them together, and in the love that had made them both finally and completely home.